So welcome everyone to MIT Sloan Alumni Online. We are bringing you conversations with principled, innovative leaders who improve the world, and we're so glad to be with you today. The campus is buzzing as we prepare for graduation and reunion taking place next week, and we hope to see some of you back to celebrate for reunion. You're always welcome. It's a great opportunity to reconnect with your classmates and with MIT. And for our program today, we are joined by Ray Rothrock, SM, class of 1978, renowned venture capitalist, author, and philanthropist. He's here today to discuss lessons learned building digital resilience and sustainable energy solutions while venture investing in technology, energy, and cybersecurity. Ray spent 25 years at Venrock, an early-stage venture capital firm leading internet and energy investments. He was listed on the Forbes Midas list twice and elected chairman of the National Venture Capital Association by his peers. Ray will share insights from his decades-long career and reflections from his book, Digital Resilience: Is Your Company Ready for the Next Cyber Threat? And I have to say, too, Ray has been a longtime volunteer, supporter, and engaged alumnus of MIT, having served on the MIT Corporation, the Corporation Development Committee, and numerous visiting committees across MIT. And we thank you for your service and for being such an ambassador for MIT in the world. For our audience, we have some prepared questions and facilitated Q&A with our moderator, Jacqueline Selby, from the MIT Sloan Executive MBA class of 2021. Our audience may enter their questions into the Q&A panel of the Zoom interface, and we'll be sure to get to as many of those as we can before 1 o'clock today. Jackie and Ray, thank you for taking the time today. I will go ahead and turn it over to you.
Okay. Well, Greg, thank you very much. And a big thank you also to the External Relations Office on your continued partnership on this series. It really is, as Greg mentioned, a pleasure to welcome Ray to share his insights with us today. Ray, as you and I were preparing for the session today, you remarked that you strive to live a life of service. And that really resonated with me, particularly as we continued to speak, because that certainly has held true throughout your career, from investing in and building companies that truly make the world a better place, to your philanthropic work, to, as Greg mentioned as well, your service on the MIT Corporation and beyond. Ray has certainly accomplished a great deal throughout his career, and all the while, he has lived out the mission of Sloan and has been a leader who is working to improve the world. So it really is a pleasure to have you with us, Ray, and thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to be here.
Thank you very much, Jackie. It's my pleasure, and Greg, thank you for that introduction. Looking forward to it. I see so many of my friends online here. Thanks for coming.
Wonderful. Well, Ray, before we jump into the questions we've prepared, I'd love to have you just share a few words about your background and experience that will inform kind of our discussion today more broadly.
Oh, my background experience. Well, I was born in Fort Worth, Texas, and grew up in a classic middle-class household. My parents were the greatest generation. My dad was at D-Day, and I went to public schools and went to Texas A&M to study nuclear engineering. I had some choices back then. I could go to Baylor and study music, or I'd go to A&M and study engineering, and then ultimately went to MIT for grad school. And I spent a number of years as a nuclear engineer, but when the industry changed, I moved to Silicon Valley. In 1981, it wasn't even called Silicon Valley in 81. National Geographic coined that term in 1982. Anyway, I came here, and it was not what it is. It was a tiny thing compared to what it is today. And I've been here ever since. I spent some time in New York with Venrock, and came back out, met my wife at Sun. She's from here, so we moved back here. And anyway, so I've been doing venture for now, what would it be? Almost 30 years, no, almost 40 years. So I can't do the math anymore, getting old. But it's been fun. It's been a great ride. And I, dare say all of us who live sort of in the back 25 years of the 20th century lived at one of the most amazing times in history in terms of development of technology, human condition, longevity of lives, the globalization, if you will, of everything from commerce to communications. The world shrank. As Tom Friedman points out, it's very flat. And so here we are into the 21st century. So.
Well, thank you, Ray, just for sharing that bit of background. So as kind of, as you mentioned, you started your career at Yankee Atomic Electric Company, and you were a nuclear engineer before you joined Sun. So when Sun went public, you were introduced to the board as well as to the field of venture capital more broadly. Could you talk a little bit more about how these experiences led you to ultimately a career in venture capital?
Sure. So at Sun, it was my first non-engineering job. And you can imagine I had a pretty nerdy nuclear engineering resume. I had to recast myself, if you will, in a way that got a job at Sun. I'd been at two failed startups before that, so I kind of had the sting of what it's like to watch a company not survive. But at Sun, they hired me to be an evangelist. A catalyst is what we called ourselves in those days. And because I had used a lot of engineering software, my mission was to convince all those people who wrote that software for engineers to move it over to the Sun workstation. So I was selling Sun as a concept and as a powerful computer and trying to convince. So I was in sales, basically, although I wasn't getting a commission, but I was promoting and evangelizing Sun. So as a result of all that work, and also I had, with my technical background, I could talk to the Sun engineers, I could talk to the customers who were engineers. So I just had this, I don't know, Rosetta Stone, if you will, to connect the engineers with the customers and so forth. So when it came time to go public, there's a part of the S1 prospectus that you file is, what does the product do? How's customers use it? What value does it bring and all that? And I got asked to write that part of the S1 with others, of course. So I, found myself sitting in a big room with lawyers and engineers and investment bankers. And during that time, I met John Doerr, who was on the board from Kleiner Perkins, a pretty famous VC. Bob Sackman, the late Bob Sackman, he was with US Venture Partners. And I met the Sun founders, got to spend some close time with them, Andy Bechtolsheim and Bill Joy, in particular, Bill. So anyway, that really, I got to sort of see the whole sausage, not just the piece of it that I was working on, the whole thing. And then after we went public, one day my boss at that time, her name is Carol Bart, pretty famous Silicon Valley executive, came down to the office and said, geez, Ray, you're tracking beautifully. We like your work. You're going to be a vice president someday, but maybe you ought to go to business school. Nobody in business had ever said that to me, although I was encouraged as an undergrad to sign up for business school, and I had. And also at that time, my wife, Meredith, we were pretty thick, as you can imagine. And so her notion was, you should go to, if you want to go to business school. She was a huge fan, supportive. Her brothers had gone. So anyway, I went to business school with the intention of getting into venture capital because, one, I'm a broad person in this. I like a lot of different technology things. I'm a technophile. I study this stuff. I understand it. I seem to communicate it well. And I'm a pretty good sales guy. And venture capital let you participate in a portfolio of companies and businesses. Whereas at Sun, I was down deep, and in the two failed startups before that, I was actually deeper. So it felt more liberating to be part of the bigger ecosystem. And so this is 1986, 1987, or 1985, 1986, and venture. And so Sun goes public. Microsoft had gone public. Apple had been public for 6 years. The tech scene was happening, and I was living with a guy who was a brand new venture capitalist at US Venture Partners, and he was telling me anyway. So I got sort of a lot of input, and some of my best friends were all saying, Ray, so I went to business school, went to Harvard, with the support of my soon-to-be wife and my company. And so that got me into it. And, just a touch on that, nuclear engineering, it's in the 70s, it was the cool subject, just as AI is today, nuclear engineering was in the 70s. And you take all the courses in electrical, chemical, material science, everything across the board. It's a very broad curriculum compared to just being a computer science worried about operating systems, for example. So I always seem to gravitate to those kinds of things. So that would be that experience. And here I am now, with all the deals that I've done now and all the areas that I've focused in. So anyway, it's hard to say focus in areas plural at this point, but it is what it is. So.
Well, no, thank you for just providing that background and framework. So, certainly as Greg mentioned and you touched on, I mean, you spent the better part of 25 years at Rothrock. And during that time, as Greg mentioned, you led internet and energy investing. So could you talk a little bit about, during your career there and maybe more broadly, just your career as a venture capitalist, what are some of the most critical lessons that you've learned about the industry during that time?
Yeah. Well, I'm sure a lot of people have learned these lessons, but unfortunately, in the venture capital world, you relearn them sometimes. So while I was at Venro, I was there for 25 years. I led the initial round of capital, professional money, into 53 startups. So these started with pre-revenue. It was an idea. Maybe there was some technology, and these were all kinds of companies, not just internet and energy, but there was some. I did a semiconductor company, if you can believe it, and some other things. I did a healthcare company once. I had 8 IPOs out of that 53. So that's a pretty sizable hit, which is what got me on the Forbes list a couple of times. But the real lessons, there's two things I think to really drive. One, focus. If you get a management team that strays for good reasons, you can wind up diluting your energy. It's hard enough to do a startup. I mean, I think if people really knew how hard it was, they would never do them. Risk is not in the vocabulary of an entrepreneur, yet opportunity is. And so they tend to focus. And I wrote a paper in 2016 for the National Academy about the value of venture capital. And it's about keeping the mission of the company in the lane. This is really important because it's real easy to get distracted. So, well, maybe we'll go here. Maybe we'll paint it red and go here, or paint it yellow and go there. You got to stay focused if the mission is still good and current, which requires the teams to be very intellectually honest with what you're learning as you develop the product, go to market, and hear what the customers have to say. So focus is one. The second thing, and this is the one that's not so obvious until it is, and it's the malalignment. So all the way from the person that greets you when you walk into the front door to the CEO to the customer, and this includes the board, the investors, the shareholders, everybody, you have to be aligned on the same mission. If you're not on the same mission, then when things come out of your mouth, it's about whatever mission you were interested in. And that can be the conflict and create a bunch of headbutting. And frankly, it's very distracting. And then you go about worrying about, one of the rules of being on a board, the boards are for the debate. Everyone should come to the board prepared to debate the issues or whatever it is. But then you decide what the action is based on what the conclusion of the wisdom is. And when that door opens and you walk out, you got to be on it. And if you walk out and say, well, I didn't quite agree with that decision, I'm not sure I'm there, you've just now completely sullied the whole process. And it's really important not to do that. You can disagree all you want, but when you walk out of that room, you got to be aligned. And malalignment can take years for that poison to seep into the system and cause trouble. But that's usually it. So focus and alignment are the two things. And I think it's the responsibility of the board and the venture capitalist because of this paper I wrote once about that. And there's other things that fail. You don't quite build the product right. You try to sell the product. You painted the product blue and the customers want it red, and the company comes back and says, no, we're going to keep it blue. It's like, that's usually a sign of failure or at least flattening out. There's all kinds of other little tidbits, but those are the two big items.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Those are incredibly important points. And I think kind of building upon that, I mean, you mentioned having 8 IPOs, and certainly you were on the Midas list twice, as well as the chairman of the National Venture Capital Association. So you've had a wonderful career and a very successful career. So could you share your insight into what you think attributed to that success?
Well, successful companies, identifying entrepreneurs who had what it takes. Mm-hmm. I had 7 wipeouts too. Some venture firms bury their dead at night. Some of us don't. But I actually thought it was a bit of a badge of courage, or a badge of just that I'm an enlightened VC, that these things don't always work out for various reasons. I think just being the intellectual honesty of it and having a conversation with the entrepreneurs, all of them, and one of the things that my wife has said to me many times when she's been watching me is I try to seek a win-win situation. That's the alignment thing. You come in, I want two, they want one, maybe you sell at 1.5 or whatever. But if you walk in, well, I must win and they must lose, I think you've just created trouble. And startups are hard enough. So I always seek the win-win, and sometimes that means compromising. And I'm not saying you win by committee. You have to have a leader. A committee is just a support group. But that win-win mentality really matters. And I think that's why I was largely successful. I got a reputation for that. I've been in boards where the company was going great and suddenly it collapsed and we had to figure out what to do. And so anyway, I got, called in actually after I had retired from Venrock. I got called into one of Venrock's portfolio companies to figure out what to do with it. And it was a difficult situation. And I had to make some pretty hard choices. But at the end of the day, it turned out okay.
Mhm.
But it's about that, finding that win-win. That's that. And then I think, of course, great results. And look, the best outcome is an IPO. And there's a lot of seed investors and early stage investors that sort of invest here and make or invest in the seed and sell out at the A. Well, that's interesting. You make money that way, but you don't make a reputation. You don't make a brand. You don't make gigantic companies that better the economy or better the customers and the people and all the stakeholders that are involved. That's keeping that in mind. That was one of the great lessons I took from HBS. I don't know if they still teach it, but we had several cases on leadership as a corporate executive. You got to worry about not just the shareholders, but the stakeholders, the customers, the employees, the community, everything. So I always had that attitude, and I think Harvard reinforced it. And I tried to carry that into the venture capital. So those are some of the reasons. Being at the right, creating the right deal, being in the right place. So for example, when internet was happening early, this is Tim Berners-Lee and invented HTML. And a couple of us partners at Venrock downloaded the Mosaic browser from NCSA, and we started playing with it. It's like, well, where's this happening? Well, it was happening in Illinois. I had a company in Illinois, so we went to see NCSA. So I just happened to be at the right place at the right time. And then when we started understanding the internet, because I've been at Sun, we were on the UUCP net, the ARPANET in those days. But now I understood this sort of virtual world that was being built. Well, what do you need? You need security. Okay, here we go. So I went to the first internet conference in San Jose. There were about 30 companies there. Half of them were security companies. One of them was named Checkpoint. And I went around and took my notes and eventually got them to take our money, but they were based in Tel Aviv. And it was the first time Venrock had invested internationally. I was the first American in that era to go to Israel with money in my pocket. Quite literally, I had the money and checks in my pocket, and we did the deal. And Checkpoint was just a gargantuan IPO in those days. Whopping $2 billion. Compared to today, that's not much, but it put me on the map. And then you think, oh, what else is coming? What intrusion detection? It's like anyway, you start thinking at that high level that I learned to think about when I was at Sun. How is all this affecting the rest of the world? I've talked too long on this one, but that's what I think made me very successful in the internet investing time. The ability to kind of see the future and to take that next step. Not all of them worked out, but most of them did. I mean, I did 15 cybersecurity investments at Venrock. I only lost my money in one, and I think I had 4 IPOs.
Wow.
And my good friend John Thompson at Symantec bought 5 of my security deals.
Wow.
He put a lot of money in the LP's pockets at Venrock.
Wow. No, I think those are very important points. So thank you, Ray. And kind of switching gears a little bit, if there are members of our audience today who are interested in a career in venture capital, what advice would you offer to them?
I get this question a whole lot. So venture capital is about building companies. And so you need to be selective because you got to know what you're not going to do. But I would say from a personal point of view, if you've studied to be an engineer or studied to be an accountant or studied to be a finance, go do that for a while. really hone in those things you've learned in school. So don't graduate with your BS and immediately go into venture capital because you don't know anything. All you've got is a diploma. Go do something real. If you can, go do sales. Because let me tell you, sales is what it's all about. If your company doesn't have sales, it dies. You can't raise venture capital forever, despite what we see in some of these AI deals and stuff. But anyway, you need revenue. And so you got to understand the sales process. You got to understand the value creation and what makes people give you money for whatever product you've created. I think that's just huge. I learned that in spades at Sun. Oh my gosh, the Sun Salesforce taught me so much about that particular dynamic. And then I think you gotta have a certain level of maturity to empathize with the entrepreneurs. Having the career I had as an engineer and then in startup companies was very powerful. But at the end of the day, like one of the things that all that background allowed me to do, I would often just buy the product of the company I was investigating and install it. And you go to an entrepreneur who's got 20 VCs sitting in the lobby, and you finally get your 10 minutes or 15 or whatever it is, an hour, and you say, yeah, I bought the product I installed. I didn't like this thing, and this was really good. The entrepreneur lights up. I'm empathizing with the person, and so it's about that kind of relationship building, and you got to know how to do that. And you don't do that, I think, in college. I think you do that in the real world. Mm-hmm. So I think some real world experience matters.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful advice, and particularly the focus on sales too. So thank you.
Sure.
Switching gears, I want to take a minute to talk a little bit about your book, Digital Resilience.
Yeah.
Could you share what inspired you to write the book?
Yeah, I was inspired by the management team at Red Seal, where I had stepped in as a CEO. It was a company that had about 15 million in sales. It was dying very fast. It ran out of cash. But yet the product was very powerful. So my Venrock called me up and said, hey, can you go in and just tell us whether we should sell it, shut it down, or do what to it? And so I went in and did that. So went in and evaluated it, and the product was pretty darn powerful. We had all the 3-letter agencies in DC using it, the DoD. It was a useful, powerful product. It basically built a software model of your network right down to the layer 3, layer 4, and everything else. So anyway, it was really cool. But it was expensive, hard to sell, blah, blah, blah. So I turned it around, recruited a new management team, product, marketing, sales, operations, finance, everything. Anyway, so in those early couple of years, of course, I had a reputation as a venture cap, so I could always get an audience typically. But I learned I would go see the CISO at the NSA or the CISO at the CIA or the CISO of the Department of Defense, who I've become good friends with now. He's no longer there, but we're still a relation. Anyway, you begin to form this notion of, wow, and we had the Sony attack, we had the Office of Personnel Management attack, we had the Target attack, we had very visible national attacks. So it's like, we have all this great technology. Why are people still getting attacked and failing to protect themselves? Mm-hmm. Well, the word resilience comes to mind, and we started adopting that at Red Seal. And one day somebody said, Ray, you need to write a book. Seriously, the management team said, you should write a book. And I said, oh my gosh, it's hard enough doing a turnaround, much less write a book. But it turned out, because I'd done all these other cyber deals at Venrock and had all these relationships and what have you, the National Venture Capital. So I said, okay, let's do it. And the notion is you can have perfect networks, but there's no such thing. You need to spend what you can on prevention, not getting penetrated. But you will get penetrated. People make mistakes. Humans make mistakes. And so, okay, if that's the case, how can we be more resilient? How can we respond when that event occurs to us? I mean, it shut Target down for days during the Christmas season. It shut Sony down. I mean, Sony was wiped out for 2 weeks. Sony Pictures. And anyway, so the concept of resilience. And so I started collecting stories and talking to people, and I wrote this book, found a publisher who demanded that I back up every single fact that I had in the book. So that was fun too, but it took, I say it took 30 years to prepare to write the book and about 18 months to write it. And to my delight, I still get royalty checks. I would have thought it takes so long. So you give them the final transcript, and it takes like a year and a half to get it actually in print and distributed. I said, oh, by the time this is out there, this day will pass. Well, I was wrong. People still need to understand how to make their networks resilient and how to react to that inevitable penetration. Today, it's not so much someone breaking through your firewall, it's some person clicking on an email with a phishing attack and releasing your credentials. And once you do that, boy, look out. There's not much you can now. And anyway, there's a lot you can do. So the book, that's what the book's about. I explained it was intended for management. It doesn't require an engineering understanding of it. Just you're a management person. Here's the concept of penetration. Here's the concept of phishing. Here's this and this. I actually I reference Moby Dick in the book, meaning Ahab is hooked to the harpoon and he gets the whale and they're all connected together. So we're all just in this big hot tub together. So you just got to do what you can. So anyway, it was fun.
Well, absolutely. So you touched on it a little bit, but could you speak a little bit about your thoughts on Cybersecurity Today? Because you wrote the book in 2018. So
Yeah.
have your thoughts on cybersecurity evolved and changed today than at the time you wrote the book?
Yeah, great question. And it has changed for the better. I think today's technologies, the firewalls, the intrusion detection, all that stuff is really good. You think about it. We were all worried after Russia invaded Ukraine that there'd be all these cyber attacks against the United States. Well, there were, but they didn't work. So our human training and our ability to think through what the issues might be, and then the deployment of technology and the operation of technology is really quite good. So it's just gotten better and better and better, but it also means the bad guys are getting better and better and better. They are well funded. I don't know how many there are. I've seen numbers, $100 million invested by the bad guys on attacking stuff. But what's really mattered is all that technology doesn't stop you or me from accidentally or intentionally pushing on that reply button on an email or whatever, wanting your credentials. Or these days it's coming over text. I get 3 or 4 texts a day, somebody wanting my credentials for the last one was my toll tag. Was you needed to pay your toll tag. Just click here and give us your credentials. I mean, anyway, it's gotten really bad. So the problem is up. Now we have AI, and here we are today, right? So now it used to be the phishing attack occurred and the credentials were sent back, and the attacker could use those credentials to get into your network and do some bad. Not true anymore, I think. Now you hit the fish hits you, you hit the button. All the technology it needs is in that fish. It doesn't have to go out and come back. Now it's in, and it's going to start to do things on its own because it has this AI capability. That's pretty terrifying. The other thing that I don't know how to fix this other than, what was Reagan's confirm? Oh, I forget his cliche, but anyway, you're now in a decision seat in a company, and you've got to take a decision, and you've got all this data that's coming to you, and some of it could be fake data to try to convince you to say push the missile button, say you're the president of the United States. So you need to confirm everything. And so I think the defense to that is to seek out lots of confirmation from lots of different sources instead of the one thing you used to depend on. That guy, those analysts down there would sometimes come to a conclusion, and that would wind up on the president's desk or the CEO's desk or whatever it is. So we just have to be more, I think we have to take a breath, ask ourselves, is this truth? How can I confirm it? But we got to do it fast. And that's where AI on the defensive side comes in handy, right? You feed all this to, everybody's worried about hallucinations. Yeah, I'm worried about it too. But, if I ask a question of a human being and they give me an answer that doesn't quite make sense, I go ask somebody else the same question, and maybe the next person. And so I sort of average out what it's going to be. Anyway, it's I think we just have to not take the computer's answers at face value instantly. I think we have to be a little more skeptical than we were 5 years ago. and just get better that way. And that's a maturity thing, and that's there's a lot of training, right? I love it. I sit on boards sometimes, and I sit on cyber committees of public boards. So I say, okay, we're going to run a test, and nobody's going to know what the test is. And someone calls the CEO at 2 a.m. in the morning and says, I have your credentials. I'm in your network. What do they do? That wasn't done 5 years ago, but it's done today. So
Wow.
anyway.
No, that's really very good advice. So thank you for sharing, Ray.
Sure.
So I'd like to switch gears and spend the next couple of questions talking a little bit more about your philanthropic work.
Sure.
So first, I mean, as we've mentioned, you are a passionate philanthropist, and you are an advocate for the performing arts. So could you speak to us a little bit about what interests you, both in the philanthropic world, of course, more broadly, but specifically about performing arts?
Yeah. So as I said in the beginning, I actually had an opportunity to go to college on a music scholarship. And I was a pretty good musician. At A&M, I helped form up a civilian symphonic band, which didn't exist. So us non-ROTC guys could have some music in our college life. But I've always been interested in performing music, and it's very special. I mean, I took piano and I played a lot of solo stuff, but there's nothing like being in a group or an orchestra and playing something, and it's all together, and you get that feeling and that jive. So performing arts is really, it's an unbelievable feel good moment. I mean, it's a high when it works, and when it doesn't, it's like your ears or whatever, someone's out of tune. The related to that is performance is everything. Life is a performance. As I said earlier, you got to learn how to sell, right? So how do you cold call someone, have self-confidence that what you're going to say is important to them? How do you figure out what to say to them? Performance is very much like that. And music performance, you have scores for the most part. But real life doesn't have a score. So you learn from your own experiences and being taught by other people how to do things the right way and the wrong way and what to avoid. So, but performance is really, really important, I think. And in the 90s and even the early 2000s, as my son was growing up, a lot of schools ran out of money. They cut music, they cut performance, they cut athletics in some cases, which is a similar performance, which is unfortunate. So we got involved, Meredith and I got involved in helping bring back some of that to the local schools. And it was such an easy sell to everybody because everybody knew how important it was. And so anyway, it evolved. And I'm just 30 seconds on this. So when I was in grad school in the late 70s, the world was in trouble. Inflation was 18%. The Erie Canal had caught on fire. Limits to growth. All these books were being written about how bad, the earth can't afford it. All reasonable stuff, but it turned out to all be wrong. But one of the books I read was a book by Albert Speer, who was Hitler's architect, and he was asked in the book. He has a whole section on educating the German kids, and they had a philosophy for cutting out all the arts. They didn't want kids to think critically. They wanted kids to be automatons. And this was in place for about 10 years in Germany. And so when I saw it getting cut later as an adult, I said, oh, we can't do that. We got to bring it back. So that was part of the motivation, a small part, but that's how I got my, so that's a big part of my philanthropy. Another part of my philanthropy is a lot of NGO work with regard to climate and policy, things like that. The last 10 years, I've spent a lot of time and money dealing with national policy, local policy on energy related things. Energy is the elixir of life. You need a lot of it. It's got to be cheap. So that's what I work on.
Thank you, Ray. It's wonderful in your dedication to both areas. So thank you.
Yeah.
And of course, you've been very dedicated to MIT as well, as Greg noted in the beginning, and most recently, certainly serving on the corporation.
Yeah.
So Could you talk a little bit about those experiences? And then also, for those that are joining us today that have a desire to volunteer and become involved and kind of give back to the MIT community in a similar way that you have, do you have any advice that you would offer them?
Well, I'm sure I do. The MIT is a very big thing. It's like that elephant, right? And everybody touches the left front foot or the trunk or the tusk or whatever it is. It's a big thing. So almost regardless of what you're interested in, you will find a place at MIT for that. Point one. Point two, the visiting committees is a very unique, essential element of MIT. And I've been doing visiting committees for 20, 22, 23 years. I got involved in the nuclear committee in the early days. And so it's important in MIT, but I will also tell you, it will expand your network. You will meet a whole layer of people that you have no access to. I met the chairman of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. I had no idea who he was. He's a good friend now. We keep up. So not only do you do a lot of good for MIT by bringing that outside perspective in, and they take it very seriously, but you also meet an amazing amount of network, which can lead to other opportunities and stuff. So that's that. Then there's the development committee, the corporation development committee, which I've been on for a long time, which is, for me, the idea is to identify opportunities for philanthropy to come back to MIT, and I do that as best I can. And I meet a lot of people, obviously, and that network matters. But that was not nearly, I think, for me, not as nearly as interesting as the visiting committee. And then third, the corporation. So Art Sandberg, a gentleman I met on a board, we were investors together. I had no idea who Art Sandberg was. Art Sandberg is like, I don't know, class of 62 or 3, MIT Aero. He was ultimately the founder of Pequot Capital in New York and was hugely successful. Anyway, Art and I struck up a relationship, and my partner, Tony Sun, at Venrock, was an MIT grad, both undergrad and grad. And he encouraged me, but I had to get to certain people, and eventually there's a whole process for alumni, for presidential appointees, all kinds of processes. I had no idea what any of that was. I got a phone call from Art and said, Art, hey, Tony Sun says you might be interested in joining the corporation. Would you be? And I said, I would love to know more about it. So off we go. Over the years, when Tony was on the board before me, the president of MIT goes around, and I met several of the presidents. So it was fun. And, a little bit like that, that opportunity at Sun Microsystems to understand that S1 and the business and the world. This corporate MIT is a very, very special university. Of course, it's 98% STEM, but it has a massive performing arts capability. In fact, Meredith and I contributed to the new music technology building right there in the middle of campus. If you've not seen it, everybody, you've got to go see it. This is a state of the art. What MIT can do for music, they're doing it right there. I remember, so the number one course used to be the freshman for CS. You know what the number 2 course is? Theater. People want to perform. They want to learn how to present themselves. It creates confidence. You prepare. The number 2 course that people sign up for. Not many people graduate with theater degrees, but they take it because they understand how important performance is. So anyway, that's just a piece of it. And of course, you're all MIT grads for the most part, but anyway, it's just been I'll tell you, the only thing I don't like about it, I live in Portola Valley, California, and it is in Cambridge, and it is a long airplane flight to and from Cambridge, but it is always worth it.
Yeah, yes, both of those things are very true. Yes, absolutely. It is a long flight, but it is always worth it. Well, It sounds like there's very much a consistent theme too around going back to sales and building relationships and finding those connections with people has been kind of instrumental in each part of your life.
Yeah. You never know, right? That old cliche, you kiss a lot of frogs. That's the way venture capitalists. I saw, and we used to keep a record of it. I saw about 10,000 projects live. I met 10,000 entrepreneurs in person to select 53. So you do meet a lot of people, and sometimes it comes back, right? I had one entrepreneur 4 times. We had such a great relationship. So,
incredible.
Yeah.
So I think great, Ray, one more question, and then we'll move. We did receive a number of questions from audience members, and then we have a few chat too as well. So we'll move to those. But one more question I wanted to ask is, certainly you've had a wonderful career as we've talked about today, and you've been involved in a variety of organizations. Could you share just of these experiences, what are you most proud of?
Oh goodness. When you sent me this question, I had to reflect on it. Um, you know, there's a thing in the Boy Scouts that you're taught when you go camping, and that is to take only pictures and leave nothing behind. And the parallel for me is whenever you get involved in something, you what you leave behind, the impression, the whatever it is you built, whether it's a performing arts center or professorships or student scholarship, whatever it is, when that passes on, your role is done, and it doesn't matter anymore. It's not about getting credit. It's about you've now enabled someone else to pursue their dreams. Maybe they'll give it back. There's that, what is it? Pay It Forward, that movie or the book. This has sort of been what's in service. I mean, you get so much from service. Sometimes it can be very tedious and difficult, but at the end of the day, you smile and look at what you've built and the relationships you've had. So that you get that photograph, if you will, of that experience of the camp out, but you've left no trash, no detriment behind. Of all the things, I mean, gosh, I don't know. I look at many things at Venrock. I led the internet investing there, which sort of was a whole new way. Venrock had been in all the early. They were in Apple. They were in the early spreadsheet company. Anyway, so that opportunity came along, and I just happened to be at the right place at the right time. So I sort of put them in there, which was a big deal. And we recruited a team to do that. And then energy comes along. So I feel like I've contributed in those ways to that leadership. And then with the National Venture Capital Association, oh my goodness, the year I was picked as the chair, the president had a heart attack. And so and he was out of commission. So I found myself going back to Washington every 2 weeks for a week while we recruited a new president and running the organization, which we got the Jobs Act done in those days. I don't know if you know what that is, but it was a big, big deal. This is during President Obama's time. And so I got to go to the White House. I mean, just timing, right? I'm very proud of that we kept the organization together. We grew the NVCA, and I mean, now it's bigger than that. But I must tell you, look, at the end of the day, I think I have a fantastic wife, Meredith. She has been so supportive. We have a wonderful son who's grown up to be a great citizen, a creative artist, a musician, dancer, actor. When I look back on those things, and they've participated in many of the organizations and stuff, their support has been essential. So, today I get to play the bass in my son's band. I get to do these kinds of interviews and talk about things, but the impact of building the companies I did, those, Cloudflare and Checkpoint, these are gargantuan companies that are going to make the world safer. And there's many more, of course, but these are just, one last story. So at Venrock, we would every year do our annual meeting, and in those days it was only the Rockefeller family, just the family. And David and Loris were both alive, and they would sit in the front, and the cousins and others would sit around, and we would give them our report. And by the way, this was on plastic slides in those days. This is before PowerPoint, but we give it, and Mr. Lawrence, Mr. Rockefeller, LSR, we called him. Mr. LSR would, at the end, he would say, "So, Venrock, how many jobs did we create? What's the tax base? What's the revenue base? What impact did we have on the American economy and on the world?" And we always had that slide handy. But it was so rewarding to hear our limited partners, the Rockefeller family in those days, ask that question. And so I kind of tracked that in my own career over time. I got a little spreadsheet. I keep up with it. And if someone asked me right now, I could pull it out and show you just what my work has done.
There are so many wonderful pieces of advice and insight in what you just said. It's fantastic, and I think a perfect way to end. But I love what you said about leaving what you being mindful about what you leave behind. I think that's
Right.
just wonderful advice.
Right. Right.
Well, thank you, Ray. So let's move to some of the questions we received from audience, because there were a number of very good ones. So we'll start with the expansion of venture capital. Has expanded over the last 30 years, and the landscape has changed for investing and LP considerations. And how do you see that potentially changing and moving forward?
Yeah. So when I got in 88, it was a $1 billion industry. In 2000, it was a $103 billion industry. Today, I think it's probably between 100 and 300 billion every year. These are every year numbers kind of thing. So it's ginormous. There were only 50 firms in 88. Today there are 5,000 firms. And I don't know how many partners that represents, maybe 20,000, 30,000 people. Couple that with the education of entrepreneurs. I mean, entrepreneurs was not a word even used in college when I was in college. Now it's like everybody takes entrepreneur courses. So the amount of ideas and the amount of money are all coming together. It became an asset class to the larger LPs, the hospitals, universities, and stuff. And it therefore has to live in certain rules about returns, liquidity, and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's unfortunate, because sometimes it takes a long time to build a great company, a long time, not just 3 years. And so sometimes you get partnerships that are focused on big projects, like we did a lot of pharmaceutical stuff, which was 10, 12 years. I mean, it just takes a long time. We did energy projects that took 10, 12 years. But a lot of people are focused on other stuff. That is, buy low, sell high, and move on. So it depends on what kind of philosophy. But the venture capital business is very much, it's giant. It's very diluted. And I think I would venture to guess the average age of the GP is less than it is when I got in when I was 34. And it's just very different. It's become more of it behaves like an asset class now, less than like a company building class, which is what it was 30 years ago. That's the impact.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, building upon that, you've mentioned how the industry has evolved, and another question we received is that some say venture capital is dead, and others say that it is going through a massive transformation. Could you share your views on the industry?
Yeah, I think that's true. Although if you dig into the data, the transformation is not as what you think. In VC, the top 10, 20% of all firms make all the returns.
Mm.
And it's the same in the 80s, in the 90s, in the 2000s, and today. So people think there's a big transformation. The big boys are getting bigger. The AI, it takes now billions of dollars of investment to do these things. I'm not sure. So the transformation is more in the scale, sort of the bigger the financial risk that people are taking. I think that matters, and it's certainly had a big impact. But the transformation, I'm still struggling with. I think it's all about deal flow. I don't think that's changed. That's not transformed. But I do think the scale to participate in a meaningful way, you have to have billions now, not just hundreds of millions. That's a transformation. And I think the deal flow, the relationships that you build along the way will matter. Your personal brand is everything. It's everything. I became, Mr. Cybersecurity guy. And I saw it for a while. I bet for a decade, I saw every cyber deal created just because I had that reputation. So is that what it's, so that park all that. The thing that is definitely happening is the whole defense tech, right? That's a whole new category. There's only 2 companies that seem to make a difference, yet they're only still 2% of the whole defense investment. So it's pretty trivial, but it could be big. The fact that the government is now interested in what we're doing here in the Silicon Valley in a really big way, that's a transformation. And we should pay attention.
Well, so building upon that, the next question we received is, what policy or market-based mechanisms could be introduced to encourage broader adoption of standard cybersecurity testing and practices, particularly among small and medium-sized businesses?
Yeah, well, I don't think there are enough cybersecurity professionals for all those small and medium businesses to hire. Fact, and you wouldn't want to. That's not your focus. That's not your business. Just like we outsource accounting, we outsource lots of things, right? HR is now outsourced mostly. So it's just, you want to do what you want to do. So one of the deals that we did at Venrock was called Cloudflare, which focused on what we call in those days the long tail. I guess that's still a term of art, but it's all those small bits. So you can get, Google level security for a modest price every month provided by Cloudflare. So those kinds of things is what's required. Point one. Point two, automation. Being able to test your business or have a service test your business's capabilities. That's all automated. AI is going to do that for you. Dispatch an agent to go around and poke at every hole you've got on your network, every machine, just everything about it. That's all perfectly good. And that's one of the things. So policy wise, we'll never get everybody to share data. That's been a dream for 25 years in cybersecurity. So it ain't going to happen. So I think having high quality security for the lowest cost is enabled by AI. And I think that's where we're headed. It's more that than it is policy, frankly.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Ray. So also moving into kind of your work in energy, could you share a little bit about the pros and cons or the benefits and downsides of wind versus nuclear energy?
Yeah, well, oh boy, real quick, all the wind and solar, this is all highly subsidized, right? Production tax credits and all that sort of stuff. It wouldn't exist without that. That's okay. But the whole wind and solar in general, these things have short lives relative to nuclear. So nuclear has got a higher entry cost for sure, time and money. And it's also on 7x24 versus wind and solar and other things, which are intermittent. And the problem is our grid isn't built for that. So there's this thing in the middle called a battery that we're still working on. Hopefully that'll take an impact. But it's very difficult. I have solar here at my home. So during the day, I've got plenty of electricity for my house. And at night, I live off batteries. And I borrow the grid when neither are functioning. We'll never do away with the grid. So they have a role to play, but not a dominant role. I wouldn't want all power sources to be from one particular thing. That's just not going to work. But solar and wind, I mean, yeah, sunlight is free, wind is free, but there's a capital investment, there's a grid investment, there's a whole bunch of other stuff behind it to make it work. And that's really essential. So you're not going to run the dry cleaners on solar or wind. You're going to run it off of some sort of steady power plant, like a nuclear power plant or a gas or something. That light manufacturing down in Santa Clara, NVIDIA doesn't run on solar and wind, and there's not enough reliable wind and solar to power NVIDIA. So you need that other stuff.
Makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Ray. So I think we probably have time for one, maybe two more questions.
Okay.
So what startup missions today, in your opinion, would be most supportive of the transition to clean energy?
So I missed the first part.
What startup missions today would be most supportive of the transition to clean energy?
Startup mission. Okay, if I understand the question, maybe I don't. I'm a huge believer. I was not an economist, I'm an engineer, but as a venture capitalist, the price of things matters. If we run out of something, just raise the price and people will find it. It's like oil and gas. So economics matter. So as a startup mission in energy, whatever you're making, it's got to compete in the commodity marketplace. And maybe you need some subsidies in the beginning to get there, but you got to have scale to get down to those low costs. Economics matter. Unit cost matter. So whatever you're working on, if you can't prove to me that you're going to get to something competitive, it's not worth it. If you want park it, that's for the industrial side. So policy is all interesting, right? Subsidies for EVs, that's all great. But what if you just make a great product that's clean and green? What if you just make a great product that everybody wants to buy? You would transform the power demand overnight. Because you've got millions of people, if not hundreds of millions or billions of people buying it, whatever it is. It's so important, economics. And so often entrepreneurs we're going to make the greatest solar panel because it's the greatest solar panel. Well, what does it cost? Well, it costs $10. Oh, sorry. If it cost $1 or 10 cents, now we're talking. And that's just lost on people. So I think the startup mission has to have the economics of the delivery in it. And if you don't touch on that, honestly, don't bother.
That's a wonderful point. Thank you, Ray. And then maybe we'll try to fit one more question in.
Sure.
Last question is just, what is your view on predictions by some experts today that say that AI unicorns or AI can be unicorns with just 1 to 10 employees?
Oh, wow. Um, yeah, that's probably true. I would think you certainly don't need as many people writing code as you used to. I've been reading recently that Microsoft and others think that 30% of their output is now from AI systems. Yeah, I think that's very possible. Before AI, look at Instagram, right? How many people were there? 25 or 30 people, and it was bought by Facebook for $3 billion. I mean, that's a unicorn with only a handful of people because they had broad distribution of their product.
Mhm.
I think the AI guys can do the same. AI has changed everything. It's changed everything. I can't. I mean, that sounds very corny, but it's just everything.
Well, Ray, it has been absolutely wonderful to have you with us today. I think we have 1 minute left, so I'm going to turn it over to Greg for a few final words, but can't thank you enough. This has been such an insightful discussion, and we can't tell you how much we appreciate having you here with us.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Yes, thank you so much, Ray and Jackie, for your time today, and thank you to our audience for joining us. When you close out of the event, you will see a survey on your screen, so please fill that out and let us know your feedback on the program today. This is our last session of the academic year as we go on hiatus for the summer, but we're looking forward to hosting Professor Nelson Repenning of MIT's Leadership Center, who will join us in September to discuss his forthcoming book. So please stay tuned for registration details and plan to join us in the fall. Thank you again, everybody. Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, Ray. Take care.
Have a great summer.
Thank you.